So Jeff, tell us about your history, because a lot of people think of you as a freak or an outlier and think your genes are something special, but you come from a Midwestern farming family, and you can tell us more about your history and how you've made your genes work for you rather than work against you, because I think a lot of people pull that genetics card up as their fait accompli and think that they really can't do anything about it. So share with us your journey so that people recognize that you're actually very close to the norm.
I mean, if you look at my background or my family history, I have two younger siblings, both more recently have lost quite a bit of weight, but we're both very heavy. My younger brother, who's the same height as I am, outweighed me by about 140 pounds. So he was double my size at his highest weight. He's now lost a bunch of weight. He's had, which has helped his health issues. He's in his 30s, late 30s. And my father was type 2 diabetic and was diagnosed in his 50s. He's probably dealing with it quite a long time before that, but he was active on a farm as a farmer, but he got out of farming when he was in his 50s and started kind of sitting more and was more sedentary because he did a sales job, driving a car around. And so he did a lot of staying at hotels, eating out, and that kind of thing. And he's been overweight. He was overweight. He's now passed away, but he was overweight my whole life. My mom's been diagnosed with dementia. So she's in a long-term care facility in her 70s. So, and I have two uncles that died, or one died early. My grandfather died in his 60s of a heart attack. My uncle died at 42 or 43. It's been 25-year anniversary this month. And one of my mom's sisters. So both sides of my family have metabolic issues, and most of it, they're all due to, in my opinion, due to diet and lifestyle choices. And I grew up with a father who, basically said, hey, part of getting older is getting fat. And I definitely rebelled against that a little bit, and educated myself, on nutrition, strength training, weight room. I always have been a runner, even a casual runner. Even when I was a mountain biker, I was still casually running 3 or 4 days a week, 20 to 40 minutes. So I've always exercised. I always had an uncle, my mom's youngest sister, who was the only one in the family who's never had any issues. He's never had any heart issues or high blood pressure or anything like that, but he's always been thin. He's always worked out. He skis hard. He runs. And always, I kind of witnessed him kind of exercising regularly, and he was never overweight like my other uncles who had heart issues. So that was to me a signal too, just as a, growing up as a teenager and young adult, watching that kind of difference in lifestyle choices and what they look like and what kind of health issues they were dealing with. So that's kind of my background, and that, and I've always exercised. I've always lifted weights. I've always run or mountain biked or skied or, mixed it up. So obviously more running in the last 20 years, but before that is what I'm talking about.
So let's kind of frame it and even take it down a little bit further down this road. So your family, other than that uncle, we're basically doing the standard American diet, right? Doing what people are sort of advised to do, right?
Well, not even advised. I would say that life revolved around food, and there's a lot of, if I look back at all my aunts and uncles, there were dessert, and there was snacking, and there was chips and soda and all that kind of typical Midwest standard American diet. So not, a lot of them grew up on a farm. So there was livestock, and there was good, meat in the freezer and that kind of stuff. But we were also eating junk food too sometimes. So, candy.
Well, let's just say it's a standard American diet, because remember in 82, when the food pyramid came in, you know, all of a sudden they recommended you eat a lot of carbs and cut back on the fat. Maybe your family didn't cut back on the fat and the red meat as much, but they were doing essentially what the government advised. They were just doing it on steroids because, I mean, let's put our tinfoil hats on and ride here a little, Jeff. Basically what was behind that was the food companies knew that this would make people hungrier, right?
Yeah.
And they would overeat by default without knowing it. So, you know, like you said, that's what happened. Then you had this uncle who made an impression upon you, and you kind of followed in his footsteps. And let's kind of unpack a little bit about your dietary journey, because you went through a whole bunch of iterations, including vegetarianism. I don't know if you went full vegan, but
I didn't go full vegan, but I went vegetarian for about 7 years. My wife and I in our 20s. And I still snuck some meat from time to time, because I never felt like I was thriving on that diet, and I was always hungry. I was never satisfied. I had the worst body composition during that window as well. Like, I lost a lot of muscle. You know, I had a lot of muscle mass. I lifted a lot in college, high school and college, because I played, 4 sports a year and played football, and I continued to lift in college. And one of the things I think that once I went to a vegetarian diet, I really, my body composition really changed, or not changed, it just deteriorated. My wife deteriorated even more. You know, our first kid was born under a vegetarian diet. He was pretty small. He had some rampant tooth decay in his first 2 years of his baby teeth. And that's when we made a shift, when he was about 18 months old, or so.
You went to Weston Price, didn't you?
Yeah, we first went for about 12 or 13 years. We went to Weston A. Price, kind of Sally Fallon, Nourishing Traditions book. And we kind of got rid of processed food and started eating kind of whole foods, organic, started eating meat again, clean meat, grass fed, free range, that kind of stuff, wild caught. And then, but we were soaking our legumes, and we were still eating grains and that kind of stuff. So, and that's kind of where we shifted. And then I did that into my 40s, that diet, and I was not thriving by my mid 40s, and was still dealing with some stuff. And that's when I shifted to kind of more high fat, low carb, kind of more paleo, got rid of grains, sugar, and seed oils in my everyday diet, 80-90% of the time.
No, that was the end of 2015 when you were.
Yeah. When I shifted to kind of OFM.
Started work on this. Yeah. So, and then you've been on sort of the OFM approach, where you're eating more protein, plenty of fat, not high fat. I mean, it's not ketogenic high fat, right?
Yeah, I've only done ketogenic, kind of moderate protein, high fat, maybe right at the beginning to reset. Yep. For a month or so. And then I've done it as a tool every once in a while, here and there, for a week or something. But mostly I probably would consider my approach now more carnivore keto, which would be more animal-based diet. So I eat pretty high protein, moderate fat, and then use fruit and potatoes and sweet potatoes strategically. Kind of the OFM protocol of bringing them in around effort and volume and training.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And that's the important thing for people to understand is as we discussed, there's way too much sugar in the diet of an athlete, just because your body looks at all those carbs as sugar.
Yeah.
Right. And you managed to ditch a bunch of that sugar, but there's still plenty of sugar there to fuel your high level training, long training, and of course your competition.
Yeah. And I would clarify here that I do use, simple carbohydrates on long runs and races, anything efforts over 2 hours. I'll use, a product like Tailwind, for example, and keep an IV drip of simple carbs coming in, and electrolytes, but other than that, I'm kind of sugar free as much as possible, maybe say 80-90% of the time. I still go out and have a drink every once in a while, and and occasionally go out to eat, and I don't stress about eating beans and rice at a Mexican restaurant every once in a while. So I'm not like dogmatic about it, but I do stick to it probably 80-90% of the time.
Yeah, and that's what we teach with OFM, right? You teach the same thing. It's like, don't stress, because stress will make you burn sugar.
Yeah.
And it's just like, once you build back that resilience and get your stomach and gut back in shape, again, this is using the tools to make your genes, including the genes of your biome, work for you. I mean, you've basically got your candida pretty much in remission without any kind of pharmacological interventions.
Yeah, it was all nutritional intervention.
Yeah,
completely put it in remission.
Yeah, so that's a great thing. So, what's your message to people about when they pull up the gene card? Because the fact is, people pull up that genetics card is like a fait accompli, that this is my destiny because of my genes. But I mean, now that they've known your history of hardworking Midwestern background, and pretty much everybody in your immediate family suffered the consequences that are considered normal in today's healthcare, right?
Yeah,
you're
the default, like that. Once you get to a certain age, you're going to be dealing with these issues, and I would say that, I think we can I do truly believe that nutrition is the way to like avoid the pharmacy, and by just choosing well. And I think we've been kind of led astray over the last 30-40 years with our kind of food pyramid, and pushing grains and sugar laden foods,
and pills to fix the problems or the symptoms.
to mask the problem more than anything. And I think that this is one of those situations that animal products have been demonized, and I would say that is about as far from the truth as can be possible. If you can kind of be animal centered, you're going to be in a lot better health outcomes long term, as long as you're not eating a bunch of junk in tandem with those animal foods.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the audience to recognize that the way with OFM on animal foods is you eat the whole animal, and when you do that, you get that nutritional balance. And when you get the nutritional balance, what I've found is, if you're not really big on animal foods, the amount you need to eat is so small, it's scary. And I've got a bias. I love a big steak. If somebody puts a 16, 18, 20, 24 ounce steak in front of me, it's toast. But even with that bias I have, what I've seen consistently, and you and Peter are included, is when you get the nutritional balance just right, whether you're supplementing with organ meat like liver capsules or gelatin, gelatin or collagen, or eating it actually real, you really don't need to eat a whole lot of animal products, and that makes it much more sustainable from a environmental, social perspective. I think that's important that people know that, because part of the demonizing of animal products has to do with people just eating tons of it. And certainly a lot of the people in the carnivore movement, to get attention online with social media, are posting how much meat they eat daily. And that's just not true. I mean, I think that if you think about how much animal products you eat and the calories and nutrition they provide in relation to the amount of physical output you're doing, it's probably scarily small.
Yeah, I mean, I do shoot for a very strategic amount of protein per day. That's the only like macro I kind of really keep track of. I do keep a running tab of carbs per day, but I really focus on a pretty high protein. I try to hit about 40 to 60 grams of protein per serving. So I eat a decent amount of protein to repair, but I also support local grass-fed sources of beef and ranches.
But 40 to 60 grams, if you're taking 60 grams as your high point, that's only a half a pound of animal product a day in terms of protein.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably eating more than that. I mean,
Right. You're eating more than that, but
but
I
a
mean,
serving, like 4 or 5 eggs of eggs, or like half a pound of burger or
yeah,
something like that. It's not a ton, but if you start doing the math, and also I would say this is a whole nother rabbit hole we don't need to go down necessarily, but I mean, when we start looking at ruminant herds and the natural system of the planet, it's really grasslands and seasonal wetlands, which would be seasonal grasslands when they're not a wetland. Yep. So all those natural wetland systems, we've lost over 70% of our natural grasslands on the globe, and those were for ruminant herds and gigantic herds, right? And not grains, not corn, soybeans, and wheat. And so when we start looking at monoculture, one plant on millions of acres, corn, soybeans, and wheat, and all these commodity crops that I came from, that farming background, but I also came from a ranching background as well. We kind of balanced the two. So I'm familiar with both very intricately. If we look at like how, one way we can vote with our dollars from a sustainable perspective is just to support grass-fed ranches, because they're actually mirroring the natural global system, and monoculture is not. So if you're buying grains, then you are supporting monoculture. So you're voting with your dollars to put one plant on millions of acres that kills a bunch of mammals, small mammals, because you till that ground at least twice a year and displace and kill a bunch of animals from their own.
Not to mention that the biome of the soil gets fundamentally altered.
Yeah, and it's not supposed to be that way, because a natural grassland is 10 times under the ground what it is above the ground, which means it's a giant carbon sink. It's a giant carbon. It sequesters carbon. And when we get to the full life cycle of an herbivore, say like a bison or an elk, or a grass-fed cow, then it actually becomes carbon negative. So it offsets its entire carbon cycle if you have it on grass, if it's grass-fed, grass-finished. So I would direct people to the book and documentary Sacred Cow. I think
Alan Savory, yeah,
and Alan Savory's work. I think both of those works are, Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers put out Sacred Cow, and then also just talking about this system of what, we have, as a population of humans on this planet, have really lost sight of the natural system and understanding the natural cycle of life and the natural system of like how they're supposed to be gigantic herds on millions and millions of acres. Instead, we've pushed them to feedlots and then put corn, soybeans, and wheat where their natural habitat is. So we've got to get that system like rebalanced. And the more you can vote with your dollars, that would be my call to everyone listening right now, is vote with your dollars. Go to your local regional rancher within a 5-hour radius of your house and buy half a beef every year.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. I've often talked about this, is like, and I've actually, by explaining this, I've gotten some vegans back to the fore. It's like, what is the natural, vegans tend to want to be into nature and natural systems and for the planet and climate change. So, it's like, where do humans fit in that cycle of life? And it's like I say, we have our eyes in the front of our head, we have canine teeth, and we only have one stomach. And our digestive tract is actually closer to a dog's than a pig's. So we're really omnivorous carnivores, and that's where we fit. And like we're talking earlier, when you eat the whole animal, which the anthropological record is clear that as hunter-gatherers, savanna hunter-gatherers, we ate the whole animal, and we feasted and fasted. I think for most of human history, feast and famine was an isolated, rare thing that most humans actually thrived, because we figured out that following these great ruminant herds, conferred a stable food supply. Yes, it took huge amounts of physical effort to harvest that and some risk, but there was always food 365, right? And following those ruminant herds just, dispersed us across the globe, right? And we we did this, with this whole idea that we had this stable food supply, that we found the fisheries, we found the ruminant herds, and like you said, the amounts of game that was plentiful in the natural system pre-modern man, it was just like, they said the Pacific Flyway would turn black when the ducks and geese were migrating, and you'd have these huge clouds of dust when the buffalo were coming across the plains, and so there was never, this whole idea of feast and famine, I think for most humans was a fallacy. I think we feasted and fasted, and having that highly nutritious, nutrient dense food also, and being able to use fire and tools to cook it with, actually helped us to get smarter as far as growing our brain. But that smarter had unintended consequences, because we think we're real clever, and then there's always the unintended consequences. But one of the things we want to put to that is your point about nutrition is, and the family is great, but it's also coupled with being regularly active, just like you are. I think, like, you forget that because that's just part of your life, right? But nutrition is a key tool. But if you're sedentary, you're signaling to your body you're in senescence, and little by little over time your cells die, or your mitochondria die, your metabolic capacity, you lose metabolic capacity.
Yeah, you got to get your heart rate up, even
Yep.
if it's just walking, right?
Yep.
But you have to get your heart rate up. If you're not getting your heart rate up, you're not signaling, and so your heart rate has to get up, and it should be up on a daily basis. I mean, if we look at like where we came from, we should be like moving every single day. And unfortunately, our technological age of convenience, we don't do as much walking as we used to walk, and we used to do a lot more walking. And so, that's something that people should be conscious of. If they're not an ultra runner, for example, they should be definitely, moving on a daily basis.
Well, and that, to a point, there was a interesting study that came out of University of Arizona, and this was probably 15 years ago or more. And this professor is an anthropologist who was studying the Hadzu, which is the still nomadic offshoot of the Maasai.
Yep.
And they are out hunting and gathering all day long, and they spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours in moderate to high intensity level efforts. And that pretty much mimics what, say, a marathoner or an ultra runner or a triathlete would do on a daily basis, right? So you couple the nutrition with what you're doing, you're actually mimicking what that evolutionary model is, right?
Yeah. Because 80+% of the time we're running like under our aerobic ceiling in training. So
yeah,
it's very like, once you're in shape, you're not running at a hard pace, except maybe twice a week at the most. And then the rest of the time, it's all just easy aerobic zone 1, zone 2 heart rate. You're cruising around, letting your mind wander, and so like definitely tapping into that kind of hunter-gatherer vibe.
Right. So it kind of mimics that pattern of behavior, like you say, not just with how we shop, vote with our dollars, but also with your physiology. So this is great stuff, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah.